How was the transition for you, moving on from the memories of your dad?
Well, I mean, I think at a point, everybody has to stand up and speak for themselves. We all have a past. We all have fathers, or if we're lucky enough to know them or not know them. But your question really speaks. I mean, for me, obviously people mostly know me as an activist and so on and so forth, but they haven't seen me, even though I've been in government for six years. They haven't really seen that side of me, and they haven't really heard from me from that side. I spent 6 years because I felt that I've been away for some time, and I had to really understand the country, take my time to study. And what informed it was that about 10 years ago, I was giving a lecture in Chicago at a university, and someone put their hand up and asked me, said, "Mr. SARO-WIWA, I've heard you speak very eloquently about the challenges and problems in your country for 10 years, but I've never really heard you talk about the solutions." And that thing stopped me right there, because I realized that he was right. And I think all of us at a point, we made that transition from, as a child or as a teenager, you are against authority to a certain extent because you want your place at the table. And so you criticize, or you want to challenge the system or the order as you see it. But there comes a point where, yes, okay, you have a voice, we've heard your voice, but what do you bring to the table?
Yes.
What is it? I think when I've done some analysis, or I've had some discussions with civil society people, and the common thread I'm hearing is that, look, in terms of civil society, all of us grew up under the military era, where it was clear what we were against. But once we moved to the democratic dispensation, the challenge was now to say, what is it that we are for? Yes. And I think that's where we are at this point. We have gingerly made this transition from military rule to civilian rule, and it poses a challenge not just for government but also for civil society and for people. How are we going to organize ourselves into a system where we balance the rights and responsibilities of both those in power and the people? And I think that it's a place where we need to give it some thought. We need to step back from the partisan sort of politics that we're seeing, where everybody is throwing stones at each other.
Yeah, your dad, he was a great man, and I have to go back to him. Now, how often do you get measured against your dad?
Well, you can see I'm reluctant to talk about him. He was the right man for the right. In fact, in many ways, he was ahead of his time. So all the ideas that he agitated for are now front and center of the political debate. Now, in fact, actually, the consensus, what he was challenging at that time was a consensus that was in his view, misruling Nigeria.
Yes.
And that consensus, I think, if we look at what is happening now, that consensus can no longer hold. In fact, it doesn't hold, because he was a champion of minority rights. Now we have a minority on the Niger Delta as the president of Nigeria. So some of the things he was talking about back then would not make very much sense now, because we already have some of the things that he wanted have been achieved. But in essence, it's not about measuring against what he stood for. What it is that, okay, what are the things that he agitated for? He was a patriot, he was a Nigerian, he wanted a more equitable Nigeria. He wanted a Nigeria that was meeting its abilities, was using its natural and human resources to become a great country.
Yes.
That is what we measure against. It's not about them, it's not about individuals, it's about, look, it's about Nigeria. How do we create a better, stronger Nigeria that we can all be proud of and we feel part of?
Yeah, talking about this, this creation of the new Nigeria. You've been in government since 2006, and you've worked with the successive presidents since 2006. Now, would you say that how would you say that your being in government, is it a way of reconciling that, what your father was fighting for, the freedom for the Ogoni people, minority rights, is it a way from, finding a solution for it, or a way of getting away from it?
No, and I think it's many things. I mean, it's a learning process. It's also, I've been part of some of the processes that led to, for instance, the UNEP report.
Yes.
That's, I came into government on the back of Obasanjo's attempt to reconcile Shell and Ogoni. And one of the most important parts of that was that Ogonis had to reconcile within themselves, so that we can go and speak with one voice at the negotiating table. So some of those things have been achieved. I came with the dispensation that, look, my father was killed, but I'm not going to come with revenge in my heart. Okay. What I wanted was that, look, let's make sure that my father's death, and many others who suffered during that period, let us make sure that their sacrifices were not in vain. And if I always say, if his gift was to die for Nigeria, mine is to live for Nigeria. So, I'm very open to seeing how we can, have a peaceful resolution of some of the challenges that we're facing. And so when I joined government, it wasn't about hiding from these things. In fact, it was actually, I was hiding from these things by not being part of it. I was living in Canada. Yes. I was writing a column. I was having a very comfortable life as a public intellectual. But I had to come back because you can't hide away from these things. I'm a Nigerian, and I felt that I could make a contribution to a better Nigeria. So going to government was not actually hiding; it was actually facing my own truth. And in a way, I decided that, look, we need to. It's a learning process for me because I've been away for most of my adult life, and so I've taken my time and I've looked around, and I think some of the views that I held back then are still valid. That we must take a very calm, dispassionate look at where we are in order for us to get to where we need to go to.
I'm going to ask you about some of these views that you used to hold, whether it's still, now some of the views you held about Shell and some of these oil companies in the past before you got into government, how has it changed?
No, nothing has changed. They must be transparent in the way they do business. They must be transparent. They must respect the environment. Those are things that are best practices anywhere in the world. And in Nigeria, we must enforce those things. The UNEP report has at least vindicated some of the allegations that we made that were despoiling our environment. So there's some science now behind that. And let's act on the science. Fortunately, I think they've adopted the principle that the polluter must pay. Obviously, the polluter must pay. So that process has to continue. So those views I held then, I still hold them now. They're non-negotiable.
Okay.
But what has changed is essentially that, look, we now have a civilian government. We don't have back then we had a military government, and the military government replied us with violence.
Yes.
So now we have an opportunity to dialogue our way out of it, where anybody who's disaffected or feels disaffected in Nigeria, we need to come, we need to take cognizance of any disaffection in any quarter, in any corner of the country, and we have to find the mechanisms to dialogue and ensure that everybody feels part of Nigeria, feels included. Okay.
Now, recently the Ogoni people and the Bakassi people, made a declaration of independence.
No, I don't. I think you're over-egging it there, because the Ogoni people, certainly in this case of the Ogoni people,
we're a faction of the Ogoni people.
Not even a faction of the Ogoni people. I think all Ogoni people have always stood on the fact that they want Ogoni resources to be used for Ogoni development.
Okay.
So the issue is that we've always reaffirmed, if you look at all the declarations that have come up, they've reaffirmed their commitment to be part of Nigeria. And that is a sine qua non in this issue. I don't think you'll see any, of course there may be minorities or individuals who do not feel the same way, but the generality of Ogoni people have accepted that they want to be part of Nigeria. But it is about, like I said, it's the consensus. We need to look at the consensus that will govern Nigeria henceforth. We need to make sure that everybody feels that they have a fair share of this country.
Yeah.
People always talk about, the oil is for all of us. But not everybody feels that way. Some of the people feel, yes, the oil is for all of us, but the pollution is only for us. So, I think it's about access. It's about, it's about making sure that everybody feels that they have a fair return for what they're giving to the country. So, there's no such thing as an independence movement in Ogonia. Certainly in terms of the issue of Bakassi, it's really about both countries honoring the Green Trees Agreement. So obviously the people there feel that they've been neglected. Some of them are, they've always lived psychologically as Nigerians, and all of a sudden, there's an agreement, and it was a negotiated agreement.
Yes.
But both sides of the border have to respect the agreement, and they have made some agitations that that the agreements have not been respected. So we have to look into all those things.
Yeah. Some stakeholders have said that Nigeria should appeal that judgment that gave Bakassi to Cameroon. Is that your opinion as well regarding judging from what the people are saying? No,
I mean federal government is looking into the issue. I mean, obviously some stakeholders have made representations to federal government, and I think it's the federal government will reply, and the Attorney General will give his own response or advice to the president. But so it's not it's not an issue for Ken SARO-WIWA to pronounce judgment on the Bakassi.
Currently, you are the Senior Special Assistant to the President on foreign media and civil society. Now, can you tell me the strategies that you have in place to achieve success in this area of your assignment?
Yeah, well, it's a big assignment. I mean, it's a job for two people, really. Because civil society it's a job on its own, because the country has changed, and civil society is an important stakeholder in determining the way forward for Nigeria. And the President has recognized this and has put the whole load on my shoulders. But
I think you got it right, man.
But in all seriousness, I mean, I think the President's disposition to these things is to listen. He wants to listen to what civil society is saying, because and I've been holding consultations. I've only been about a month into the job, but we've kept it very quiet because I wanted to take some time to take soundings, talk to some people, and to understand the psychology of this very important constituency. And so we're continuing to do that, and I think for some time now we're just going to continue with the listening process. Eventually, civil society and government have to be in partnership. I told you earlier that before, civil society was essentially set up against the military government.
Yes.
But since then, civil society has many different faces, really. There are those who set themselves up as watchdogs of government policy, and that's fair enough. There are those who want to work with government to deliver services, and again, that's an equally valid point. So we have to look at the different parts of this puzzle. But I think at this point in time, you have a president who's willing to listen, and I'm taking that position that I'm just here to listen to civil society, and I will be conveying some of those soundings back to the president, and then eventually some of this thing hopefully will transmit it into policy.
Okay, let me just ask this as a follow-up. I was going to ask you before whether you've met with the civil society. From your interactions with them so far, what's the recurring message that they're trying to pass to the president?
I don't, I've had about 2-3 weeks of consultations, and I don't think there's a strand that you can throw through it. But I think what the most important thing that I'm conveying and that they are responding to is that government is ready to listen. Government thinks that civil society and believes that civil society is an important constituency that must be consulted for government policies. I mean, tomorrow we're having this retreat with civil society, presidential retreat with civil society, where civil society is being encouraged to come and give some inputs into the constitutional review process. So I think those are the kinds of things that the president wants to see and do. When he talks about transformation, the process of transformation must in itself be transformative. We can't continue to do this us and them approach to governance and followership or whatever. So it's about the government being more open, more transparent, and listening, balancing the rights and responsibilities of each part of the governance puzzle. So for me, I'm just a cog in that wheel. Obviously, my former or my current constituency is still civil society. Yes. I'm an activist in government. And that's not a tautology. I mean, many people, even my father, some of my heroes have performed
similar
roles yes. within governance structure. So, for me, it's a continuum. I'm here to listen, and I actively believe that the most important constituency in the future of Nigeria is civil society.
Okay. Now let me go back to the other side, other part of your assignment, which is the international media. You worked most of your career in foreign media. You were the Guardian of UK.
Yes.
You went to Canada. You freelanced for a lot of this National Geographic and all of that. Now, what would you say about this bias, this negative bias, with foreign media about reportage in Nigeria?
I don't think, you have to understand what are the protocols that govern media from any country, right? That's how they are set up to view Africa. And now it's changing. If you look at, in 2000, The Economist did a whole series on Africa and called it the hopeless continent. Just this summer, The Guardian and The Economist behind them are looking at how Africa is now the future, for the future savior. And they're talking about African lions. They had the Asian tigers, the Celtic tigers. Yes. Now we're talking about the African lions. You've got countries like Angola, who's been loaning money back to Portugal to ease that debt crisis. You have Nigeria growing at 6-7%. You have Ghana 8%. Sierra Leone, Liberia, they're finding oil in Somalia, Tanzania, Uganda. Meanwhile, in North America and Europe, they have zero growth. Yes. Or even negative. And there's a prospect for the next 5 to 10 years that their economies will stagnate. They know full well that they need to export some of their technology and their finance and their surplus capital to places like Africa, which is undercapitalized, is underpopulated, and we have infrastructure deficits. All the growth in the global economy, most of it, Africa is now the engine room of the global economy. And the most important part of that puzzle is Nigeria. Because if Nigeria were to fall apart, Angola, Ghana, all these African lions will suffer the consequences. There will be an impact on global energy security, there will be impact on food, there will be impact on electricity, provision of electricity. Refugees will pour out across all those borders, and it will impact on the global economy. So Nigeria is seen as a very important destination outside of Nigeria. And that's why you're getting this change in thinking and mentality and reporting of Africa. It is now not being seen as a basket case, but it's being seen as a success story. And we have to understand that the psychology has shifted, and we have to shift that psychology. It's already happening. The young people now, they know all of this. They're engaging. I always say that before there was a vertical engagement between young and old people in this country. Now, young people are engaging with people in Ghana, in America, and it's technology that's enabling. It's now a horizontal engagement. So the generation that is in power now has to take cognizance of that. And you look at what is happening in Nollywood and in our film industry. Yes. It is not within Nigeria. People are making money, and their audience is global. And Nigeria has to be part of that globalization. And we have to start to understand that, look, we have to take ourselves seriously, because others are beginning to look at us as a market, as a place that, look, if we develop Nigeria, the global economy will prosper. So we have to, of course, the Chinese have known this and understood this for a long time. So it's for me, as a foreign, as when trying to sell Nigeria and the president abroad, it's a very simple job, actually, because they want to hear good news. They're desperate to hear good news.
No, but there is this worrying trend, worrying trend about, past presidents placing, kind of greater premium on foreign media. They don't want to talk to the local media. When they have something, they go to the foreign media first, and then local media have to extract their stories from foreign media. This is a trend that many Nigerians condemned in the past.
Yeah.
Now, is President Jonathan going to try and balance this up by trying to sell Nigeria to the outside world, also give credence to local media?
Look, I cannot go the Financial Times, the Economist, and all these groups. You know, our job is not just, look, our audience is not just the foreign press. You have to understand that, you know, I see my job as communications. Yes. And in communications, it's not just the media. There's also civil society groups. Yes. Who are important, what I call the international stakeholders in Nigeria. Civil society groups, parliamentary association, the diaspora. These are all parts of what I see as my schedule. And I have to go and talk to them. And because they play an important part in how Nigeria is seen. Now you see, if you, even going to editorial boards of a newspaper, you go to an investment forum. These are all parts of where you have to communicate your story. So it's not just, you know, a few heads of state talking to one newspaper or whatever, and then that determines how you shape the story of Nigeria. There are many parts of the puzzle now. The global media platform, communications mix, is very complex. You know, it's by social media as well, which has, you know, you can't define social media as foreign or domestic. It is what it is. It is everything. Yes. It's borderless. Yes, exactly. And I think also what I'm also very aware of is it's very good. It's okay for me to go and tell that yes, you need Nigeria and so on and so forth. But they also need to hear what is happening in Nigeria. Yes. So, as far as I'm concerned, Mr. President knows very well that you have to tell that story. You can't tell that story unless that there is some meat to it. You have to know that, okay, what are we doing? What are we doing in power? What are we doing in agriculture? What are we doing in petroleum sector? These three things alone, if he targets those three things, he will set Nigeria, and if he is able to target those three things, he will set Nigeria on a path to development. I don't think he's going to be able to achieve much more than that. You know, we have to be realistic. And we have to be realistic about what can be achieved in the time frames, and also given the challenges that we have in capacity and so on and so forth.
But I think one of the problems that this administration, you know, is facing is that some of these things and some of these limitations and challenges are not effectively being communicated to the people, because the president came in, you know, with overwhelming goodwill from the Nigerian people. Everybody voted for him, and we have seen in a short of a year that goodwill going down. Sure. Maybe because, would you say Nigerians were, you know, they have unrealistic expectations of the president, or it's just that the administration is not moving, you know, fast enough in the right direction?
It's a bit of both. I don't think Nigerians have necessarily unrealistic expectations. Let's face it, Nigeria should be an economic powerhouse. But, you know, the reasons why we're not an economic powerhouse did not start in 2011 or 2010. No. We have structural issues. Let's be, you know, let's be fair about it.
That's very true.
You know, but we can't continuously blame the past. We have to say, look, yes, we do have these structural issues, but we need to move forward. Now, in power generation, for instance, in the power sector, sorry. You know, everybody knows that Nigeria has a challenge in power, but the opportunity is immense. 160 million people needing power. I mean, from an economic point of view, that's an opportunity. But if you look at the multiplier effect that will happen to the economy, if we are able to give power to every single Nigerian, that is that will triple, quadruple. I don't know what the impact will be, but it will certainly grow our economy exponentially.
Absolutely.
So, you know, these are things that everybody understands and knows. Hence the expectation that, look, if we can only just fix power, this country will be, you know, and so it's fair for people to have that expectation. Now, I think also government has to do a better job of communicating some of the things that we're doing. You know, we keep talking about measuring about how many megawatts that we're generating and so on and so forth. It's more than that. It's more about more than just a figure of what we're generating. We also have to be able to communicate to say that, look, we are putting in place measures that will enable us to achieve more power to more Nigerians. If we start only talking about how much we are generating, I think there's a danger there, because sometimes you then overlook some of the things that are being put in place, where we have to focus on the infrastructure, on the transmission, on the privatization, and distribution. You have to focus on those things. Even the issue of the what do you call it, the pensions and yes. So that is all part of what we're trying to achieve. And so if you only measure it according to how much
megawatts,
how many megawatts you have, then you're not communicating some of all the other things that you need to do, and people need to understand. So it's not about how many days of power you had today or tomorrow or next week, but it's about the whole, what are we doing about the whole power sector?
Yes.
Generation, transmission, and distribution. What achievements are we making in those processes? I don't think most Nigerians are aware of those things. And so for them, the response to power is just about, did I have light yesterday or am I going to have light tomorrow? Which is fair enough, that's what they need. But government has a challenge that they have to communicate what they're doing and communicate it in a way that people feel that yes, something is happening.
Now, let me take you a little bit off course. Are you on Twitter, sir?
I am, yes.
You're very active on Twitter, not very active on Twitter?
I'm not active on Twitter. I have a personal page. I actually believe that as a government official, I think that the problem with this, I have an understanding of social media that most people probably are not aware of. In 1996, I was the first editor of the Guardian in London's internet webpage. So I was one of the pioneer people, and in 1996 I had broadband when most people in the West did not. So I knew right from the outset that this was a transformative, technology.
Yes.
I understood where the thing was going to go. Within 10 minutes of sitting down in front of a screen and surfing the internet and getting my first email address, I knew that the world had changed. Right there in 1996, I think January 1996. So, I've always felt in touch with this innovation, and I've always been a student of the philosophy of social media and how that affects the way in which we live today, and how that affects politics, how that affects personal relationships, those kinds of things. And I think that it's still evolving and it's still changing. And one of the challenges I see is that, I took a Twitter page because I didn't want somebody to come and squat on my page and my name. So I took a Twitter page, but then I realized that I was in government, that anything that I said that was personal would be interpreted as a political statement.
Yes,
so I've often argued that actually I should not have a Twitter. Ken SARO-WIWA Jnr. should have a Twitter page, and that's my personal page. And whatever I say on there is personal. I should also have a Twitter page, the office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on international media. Because clearly, after I have left this job, after I've left government,
you still be Ken.
I will still be Ken, but there will be somebody else who is taking that position. So why should I have an archive of things that I've said that are on my page that is not available to the person who has replaced me? So I think that some of those things have to be thought through, and I think in Nigeria it's very important too, because we personalize so many things. If I come to you and my name is Ken SARO-WIWA Jnr., everybody has a preconception of what this man is supposed to say and what he's going to do and so on and so forth. But that's not fair, because most people don't know me. You know my father, but I'm not my father. We share the same views, but he lived in an era where there was no internet. So the Nigeria that he met is different from the Nigeria that I'm living in. So obviously that there are many things that you can't personalize politics to that extent. Yes, sure, great personalities with their influence and so on and so forth can drive change.
Yes.
And make a difference. But it's also important that the difference that they make is institutionalized. Too often in Nigeria we have this situation where somebody comes and they run an office and they have this great personality, and when they leave the office collapses. Yes. So we need to build institutions. If we have great personalities driving those institutions, great.
I'll soon run up with you now, but I need to ask this. Why is it, should I say, so difficult, or why has it been, this slow pace of development, in solving the problems of the Niger Delta? The president is from the Niger Delta. Everybody expected that the president would once and for all solve all those problems. But we still have agitations in the Niger Delta. We still have people, shouting off marginalization. And then the state governments are still saying that there are very little on the ground to show for development. So Well, why do you think this has been this case?
I'm a student of history. The Niger Delta has, in fact, if you can argue that the Niger Delta and Nigeria as a whole has been underdeveloped by global economic trends for 400 years. You know, our natural resources and even our human resources were taken away and exported, and that's been the paradigm that has governed the Niger Delta and indeed Nigeria and much of Africa. If you think that because you have a president from the Niger Delta for 2 years, that's going to radically alter that paradigm that was established 400 years ago, it's not going to happen. We need to understand that these things is going to take some time to shape. What has happened is obviously there are some incremental changes, and we have to manage expectations. In the end, President Jonathan is not president of Niger Delta. He's president of Nigeria. He just happens to come from the Niger Delta. And so, you know, the federal government has certain responsibilities to the Niger Delta. But the greater responsibilities lie with the state government, lie with the development agencies, and lie, most importantly, with the local government. So we need to look at some of those things. We also need to understand that some things have you know, at least we've been able to manage some of the agitation, some of the violence that we saw in the early part of the century. You know, so and oil production has risen as a result. But it needs to be some of that needs to be translated back into social you know, some social gains and public health gains. I mean, the UNEP report is a start, because you know, it's showing that there's a tremendous that the oil industry is a tremendous threat to public health.
Yes.
So I think it's a process. You know, in Nigeria, I always say that we're outcome orientated when we should be process driven. If we're always focusing on the outcome and comparing the outcome to where we are, then that's not the right way to go about it. The right way to go about it is, okay, this is where we need to go to. What are the processes? What are the steps we need to take to get there? And as we're always fond of quoting, it's a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. Yeah. But let's take those steps. Let's not be talking about that quote. Let's be taking those baby steps, recording it, and seeing if we can chalking off the progress as we go along. Okay,
Mr. Ken, are we expecting to see an improvement in international media reporting of Nigeria?
Yeah, I mean, it's a two-way process. It's the government providing the information, and it's the foreign press and the media processing that information fairly and accurately. So I think it's about you know, providing the environment for a more balanced reporting.
Okay. You're here for Gani Fawehinmi's memorial. Now, what would you say are the similarities between your father, the senior Captain SARO-WIWA, and Chief Gani Fawehinmi?
Obviously, they are two birds of the same feather. There's one thing I can say: they both hated injustice. You know, I was lucky enough to, when Gani was sick, he came to London. One of the last times he came to London, I went to see him, and you know, it was a wonderful thing. You know, of course, he defended my father during the tribunal, and I hadn't had the opportunity to thank him and to meet him. And of course, I'd heard everything about him. And when we were doing the campaign around the world, you know, we were talking. He was the hope for us back in Nigeria. Those of us who were lucky enough to be traveling around, we were placing our hopes on people like Gani. So, you know, to see him at that time, you know, he was very softly spoken, and it was very sad to see him in that, you know, that he was having some challenges at the time. But it was also reassuring, because for me it was a connection back to my father.
Yes.
And so when people like that are no longer with us, you know, it reminds me of the sadness of also losing my father. But at the same time, you know, it's an encouragement, because you study their lives and their stories, that they were unremitting in their commitment to a better Nigeria. And they continue to do it, and their name is honored. And it's no, you know, you can have all the wealth you want in the world, but a good name, as my grandfather would say, a good name is better than riches. And we should celebrate and honor people like Gani, because they are the example that, you know, I want my children to follow.
Finally, in the shadow of the saints, You mentioned that the book was about struggle between, father and son, and trying to find a balance between, with that struggle. Have you been able to find a way to reconcile that struggle that you mentioned about?
Yes and no. I mean, I have my own children now, and teenagers now. So I'm now starting to see things from my father's point of view.
Okay.
These boys, they give me all kinds of hell, and there's nothing I can do that is right in their view. So you begin to see the ironies of it. It's an enduring struggle and so on and so forth. But the book I wrote it as a very young man. But I think the important issue, I mean, if you look at it in terms of Nigeria, is that a new generation is emerging in Nigeria, and that new generation must have a voice and must be able to fashion the country in its own image. People like me are no longer really relevant to what is happening in Nigeria in a way, because we have to set the table and invite them to come and eat.
Yes.
But we can't set the table and give them poison. they will curse us. So you just have to realize that, and I always say that, look, if you look at what happened in Libya, for instance,
yes,
Gaddafi was fated by the West. We opened up the markets, of Libya to supplies of gas and oil, and Libya was set to kind of dominate the space. And Gaddafi was seeing himself as the leader of Africa. So from that point to him crawling out of a sewer, was 7 months. So change happens very, very fast. And if we're not careful, Nigeria has so many young, unemployed, and hungry people. If we're not careful, we are going to be swept away. And you think, sometimes when you say these things, people think, oh, you're being melodramatic. But go and ask Gaddafi how long it took for him to go from that A to 0.
But will the government listen to the young people?
They have to. They have no choice. The government has no choice. It's a numbers game. Look, apartheid changed because of what? Numbers. The apartheid government realized that, look, they can continue to sit on top of black people, but eventually they will be overwhelmed by numbers. And when you have 70% of this country under the age of 30 and our population is doubling every 25 years, you better start listening and figuring out how you're going to encourage these people to be productive parts of society. Exactly. Otherwise, it's going to be a huge problem that you cannot manage.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay.